Christmas morning had always been our sanctuary. For 8 years of marriage, Sarah and I had built traditions that felt sacred: coffee and matching mugs while still in our pajamas, the smell of cinnamon rolls warming in the oven, and the careful choreography of gift-giving that we'd perfected over time. This year felt different from the moment I opened my eyes, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Sarah was already awake, sitting on the edge of our bed with her back to me. Her shoulders were rigid in a way that made my stomach tighten with unease. When she turned around, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, as if she'd cried all her tears hours earlier and was now operating on some kind of autopilot. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, reaching out to touch her hand. She pulled away as if my touch burned her. "We need to go to my parents' house early today," she said, her voice flat and mechanical. "They're expecting us by 10. This wasn't the plan. We'd agreed to spend Christmas morning together, just the two of us, before heading to her family's house in the afternoon, but something in her tone warned me not to argue. The air between us felt fragile, like speaking too loudly might shatter whatever was holding us together. The drive to her parents' house was suffocating in its silence. Sarah stared out the passenger window while I navigated the empty Christmas morning streets, Christmas music playing softly from the radio in stark contrast to the tension filling our car. Every few minutes I'd catch her checking her phone, typing quick messages to someone. When I asked who she was texting, she just said, "Mom," without looking at me. Her parents' house was lit up like a beacon, every window glowing warm and yellow against the gray December sky. Cars lined the driveway and street, more than usual, for a Christmas morning. Sarah's entire extended family seemed to be there: her siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, even her grandmother, who rarely left her assisted living facility. As we walked up the front steps, I could hear laughter and conversation from inside, but it had an edge to it, an undercurrent of something I couldn't identify. "Why is everyone here so early?" I asked Sarah as she reached for the doorknob. She paused, her hand frozen on the brass handle. For a moment, I thought she might finally explain what was happening, might give me some clue about why everything felt so wrong. Instead, she just said, "You'll see," and opened the door. The conversation stopped the moment we walked in. 30-some faces turned toward us, and I felt like an actor who'd wandered onto the wrong stage without knowing his lines. Sarah's mother, Linda, rushed over with an expression that was trying too hard to be cheerful. Her father, normally boisterous and welcoming, gave me a nod that felt more like a dismissal. "Sarah, honey, why don't you get David some coffee?" Linda suggested, though it sounded more like an instruction than hospitality. As Sarah disappeared into the kitchen, I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by people I'd considered family for nearly a decade, all of whom were now looking at me with expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed hostility. Sarah's brother Mark, who'd been my golf partner for years, wouldn't meet my eyes. Her sister Jessica kept whispering to her husband while glancing in my direction. Sarah returned with a mug of coffee and handed it to me without a word. Her hands were shaking slightly, and I noticed she'd put on the diamond tennis bracelet I'd given her for our anniversary, something she only wore on special occasions. The gesture felt ominous rather than sentimental. "Should we do presents?" someone suggested, and there was a murmur of agreement that felt forced. We gathered around the massive Christmas tree, its branches heavy with ornaments that told the story of Sarah's family history. I'd contributed some over the years, a few handmade pieces from trips we'd taken together, a beautiful blown glass angel Sarah had admired at a craft fair. Looking at them now, they seemed out of place, like artifacts from someone else's life. Gift exchange began normally enough. Children tore through wrapping paper with gleeful abandon, while adults opened their presents with more measured appreciation. But I noticed people kept glancing at Sarah as if waiting for some kind of signal. She sat beside me on the couch, but the space between us felt like an ocean. Then Linda stood up, holding a wrapped package that was clearly not under the tree moments before. "Sarah has something special for David," she announced, and the room fell silent again. Sarah took the package from her mother with hands that were now visibly trembling. She turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't love or affection or even anger. It was resignation mixed with something that looked almost like relief. "This is for you," she said, holding out the package. The wrapping paper was red and gold, festive and cheerful, completely at odds with the gravity of the moment. As I took it from her hands, I noticed it was heavier than expected, and something inside shifted with a papery rustle that didn't sound like any Christmas gift I'd ever received. "Go ahead," Sarah whispered. "Open it." My fingers felt numb as I worked at the tape holding the wrapping paper together. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the children had stopped playing with their new toys and were watching with the kind of intense focus that kids reserve. For moments, they sense are important but don't understand. The wrapping paper fell away to reveal a manila envelope, thick and official-looking, with my name typed across the front in stark black letters. I looked up at Sarah, searching her face, for some explanation, some hint that this was an elaborate joke or misunderstanding. But her expression was stone, her jaw set in determination. Around us, her family members shifted in their seats, and I caught Linda dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though whether from sadness or relief I couldn't tell. "What is this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Just open it," Sarah said, quietly. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside were papers, lots of them, with legal headers and my name paired with Sarah's in a way that made my heart sink. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The words seemed to swim on the page as I tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just divorce papers. This was a complete legal filing, professionally prepared, with dates and signatures and a level of detail that spoke to weeks, maybe months of preparation. I looked up from the papers to find 30 pairs of eyes, watching me, and suddenly understood why everyone was here. This wasn't a family Christmas gathering. This was an audience, witnesses to what Sarah clearly saw as some kind of finale. "You had these prepared," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "How long have you been planning this?" Sarah's composure finally cracked slightly. "David, please, not here, not in front of everyone." But her Uncle Bill, a man who'd never particularly liked me, couldn't resist. "She's been planning this for months, son. We all knew this was coming." The betrayal of that statement hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been going through our daily routines, making plans for the future, worrying about normal married couple things like our mortgage and whether we should start trying for kids, Sarah had been systematically planning our divorce with her entire family as collaborators. "Months?" I repeated, looking around the room. "All of you knew?" Sarah's sister Jessica, who I'd helped move into her new apartment just 6 weeks ago, had the grace to look ashamed. But others met my gaze with something approaching defiance. Linda actually lifted her chin and said, "We support Sarah in whatever she needs to do to be happy." The implication was clear. I was the obstacle to her happiness. I turned back to Sarah, the papers feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. "Why like this? Why on Christmas? Why in front of everyone?" For the first time since I'd opened the envelope, Sarah's voice wavered. "Because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. I knew you'd try to talk me out of it, try to fix things, and I—" She took a shaky breath. "I need this to be final." "Try to fix things?" I stood up, the papers scattering to the floor. "When did you give me a chance to fix anything? When did you tell me there was even something wrong?" The room was silent, except for the ticking of her grandmother's antique clock and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I looked around at faces that had been at our wedding, people who had celebrated anniversaries with us, who had welcomed me into their family with what I'd thought was genuine affection. Sarah's cousin Amy, Always the family diplomat tried to intervene. David, maybe you two should talk privately. No. The voice came from Sarah's father, loud and final. Sarah made her decision. She doesn't owe him an explanation. That's when the full scope of what was happening hit me. This wasn't just about divorce papers on Christmas morning. This was about humiliation, about making sure I understood exactly where I stood with all of them. The early gathering, the audience, the theatrical presentation, it was all designed to make me feel as small and unwelcome as possible. I bent down and gathered the scattered papers, my hands shaking with a mixture of shock and growing anger. As I straightened up, I caught sight of one particular document that made my stomach drop even further. Property division worksheets, bank account statements, even a valuation of my photography equipment. She'd been cataloging our entire life, together with the cold efficiency of an accountant. "How long?" I asked again, but this time I was looking directly at Linda. "How long have you all been helping her plan this?" Linda's face flushed, but she answered with startling honesty. "Since September. Sarah came to us after your anniversary dinner, said she couldn't pretend anymore." Our anniversary? We'd gone to the same restaurant where we'd had our first date, and I'd thought we'd had a lovely evening. Sarah had seemed quiet on the drive home, but when I'd asked if everything was okay, she'd said she was just tired. Now I realized she'd been planning her exit strategy while I was reminiscing about our courtship. "The bracelet," I said suddenly, looking at Sarah's wrist. "You wore the bracelet I gave you because this is the last time you'll wear it." She touched it unconsciously, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "David, and all of you," I said, turning to address the room. "You've been lying to my face for months. Thanksgiving dinner, Jessica's birthday party, our Halloween barbecue. You were all in on this." The silence that followed was answer enough. I felt like I was looking at a group of strangers wearing the faces of people I'd loved and trusted. 8 years of marriage, and it was ending with the efficiency of a business transaction, complete with an audience to ensure I couldn't maintain any dignity in the process. Sarah stood up suddenly. "I need some air," she announced, and headed for the back door. As she left, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The tension that had been barely contained suddenly exploded into whispered conversations and open stares. I heard fragments. "Should have done this years ago. Never was right for her. She'll be so much better off." That's when I realized the worst part wasn't the divorce papers or even the public humiliation. It was the dawning, understanding that this moment, me standing in their living room, holding legal documents that would end my marriage, was exactly what they had all been hoping for. I followed Sarah outside, leaving behind the whispered conversations and barely concealed satisfaction of her family. She was standing on the back deck, gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles were white. The December air was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the house. 8 years, I said, stepping beside her. 8 years? And this is how it ends? She didn't look at me. "I tried, David. I really tried." "Tried what? To be happy? To communicate? To give us a chance?" The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was past caring about tone. "When exactly did you try? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you spent the last 4 months planning my humiliation instead of working on our marriage." Sarah finally turned to face me, and I saw tears in her eyes for the first time that day. But even as she cried, there was something resolute in her expression that told me this conversation wouldn't change anything. "You don't understand," she said. "I've been unhappy for so long, and I kept thinking it would get better, that I would feel different. But I don't. I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "That I love you the way a wife should love her husband." The words hit me like a physical blow, but they also brought a strange kind of clarity. All the distance I'd sensed but couldn't name, all the times she'd seemed to be going through the motions of our life together. It suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe a year. Maybe longer." I kept thinking the feelings would come back, that it was just a rough patch, but... She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm so sorry, David. You're a good man, and you deserve someone who loves you completely." For a moment, standing there in the cold morning air, I almost felt sorry for her. The guilt she must have been carrying, the pressure from her family, who clearly saw me as the problem to be solved, it couldn't have been easy. But then I remembered the audience inside, the months of deception, the choice to destroy our marriage on Christmas morning in front of 30 people. "You could have just talked to me," I said. "You could have suggested counseling, or a separation, or any number of things that didn't involve serving me divorce papers as a Christmas present." "Would you have listened, really?" Sarah asked. "Or would you have tried to convince me to stay, to work it out, to give it more time?" She was right, and we both knew it. I would have fought for our marriage, would have done everything in my power to save it. But standing there with divorce papers in my hand, I realized that might have been the problem. You can't make someone love you, can't negotiate your way back into someone's heart. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. I guess we figure out how to divide everything up," and she trailed off, perhaps realizing how clinical that sounded. "And your family gets to celebrate that they finally got rid of me." Sarah's head snapped up. "That's not what this is about." "Isn't it?" I gestured toward the house, where we could see figures moving past the windows. "Your uncle practically admitted they've been planning this intervention for months. Your mother looked relieved when I opened those papers. This whole production was designed to make sure I knew exactly how unwelcome I've become." We could hear the sound of the back door opening and Linda's voice calling out, "Sarah, honey, are you okay out here?" Sarah looked at me with something that might have been regret. "I should go back in." "Yeah," I said. "You should." As we walked back toward the house, I steeled myself for whatever was waiting inside. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found. The living room had been transformed in our absence. Someone had opened a bottle of champagne, the good champagne that Linda usually reserved for New Year's Eve. Glasses were being passed around, and there was an unmistakable air of celebration. Sarah's grandmother, all 92 years of her, was holding a champagne flute and beaming like she'd just witnessed something wonderful. Uncle Bill was actually grinning. Jessica and her husband were toasting each other across the room. Even, the children seemed to sense that something happy had happened, though they couldn't understand what. "Welcome back," Linda announced, raising her glass. "Sarah, darling, we're so proud of you for finally taking this step." The room erupted in agreement. "To Sarah," someone called out, and glasses were raised throughout the room. "To new beginnings," added another voice. I stood in the doorway, still holding my divorce papers, watching my wife's family celebrate the end of our marriage like it was a graduation or promotion. Sarah looked as stunned as I felt, though whether from embarrassment or something else I couldn't tell. "Really?" I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Champagne?" The toasting stopped abruptly, and all eyes turned to me. Linda had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but Uncle Bill doubled down. "Sarah's been miserable for months," he said. "We're celebrating her freedom." Her freedom from what? From me being faithful to her? From supporting her career? From loving her? From being trapped in a marriage that wasn't making her happy? Linda interjected. "Sometimes love isn't enough, David." I looked around the room at all these people who had once welcomed me as family, who had included me in holiday traditions and birthday celebrations, who had acted like they cared about me. The betrayal was complete and devastating. "You're right," I said finally. "Sometimes love isn't enough." Sometimes you need basic human decency, and clearly that's in short supply here. I turned to Sarah, who was standing frozen in the middle of the room, champagne glass untouched in her hand. "I'll sign the papers," I told her. "I'll make this as easy as possible for you. But I want you to remember this moment. All of you. Remember that you turned the end of an 8-year marriage into a celebration, that you made Christmas morning into an execution, and that you did it in front of children who are learning what love and commitment mean from watching you." The silence that followed was different from before. This one was heavy with shame, at least from some quarters. Sarah's cousin Amy was crying quietly. Her brother Mark was staring at his shoes. Even some of the children seemed to sense that something was very wrong. But not everyone felt shame. Linda lifted her chin defiantly. "We support our daughter," she said, "and we're not going to apologize for that." "Supporting your daughter and celebrating my humiliation are two different things," I replied. "But clearly you can't see the difference." I walked over to where I'd left my coat and car keys. As I was putting on my jacket, Sarah finally spoke. "David, wait. Let me drive. You home. We should talk about this properly." I turned to look at her one last time, standing there in her family's living room with divorce papers scattered on the floor around her feet and champagne glasses glinting in the Christmas morning light. "No," I said. "I think you've said everything you needed to say, and so have they." As I walked toward the door, I could hear Uncle Bill muttering something about good riddance and someone else shushing him. But what struck me most was the sound I heard as I reached for the doorknob. The quiet clink of champagne glasses being set down on tables, as if the party was over now that the guest of honor was leaving. I drove home through empty Christmas. Streets, past houses full of families opening presents and making memories, while I tried to process the fact that my marriage was over and 30 people had just toasted its demise. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my driveway now, supposed, I realized that the worst part wasn't the divorce itself. It was the knowledge that the woman I'd loved for 8 years had needed an audience to find the courage to leave me, and that her family had been so eager to provide one. Christmas would never be the same, but then again, neither would I.